Well, just because I'm quitting this show, don't fire Moses because of me.
Why would I fire Moses because of you?
I don't know. People be doing that.
You overestimate your influence.
You are not as important as you think, and that's a good thing. So much of your psychological suffering stems from the fact that you overestimate your importance and place unrealistic expectations on yourself. You are not the main character, and that delusion is causing you to overthink how others perceive you. You are hyper aware of your surroundings and constantly overanalyze your behaviors, which is stunting your ability to live a happy, authentic life. Your suffering is not unique and is shared by many others around the world in many differing ways. But to be fair here, this mindset is not completely your fault. We live in a world where hyper-individualism has become normalized and where social media and the smartphone have created this new hyper-aware dynamic where we are all the main characters of our own carefully curated show and where we continue to artificially construct a life and identity for likes and followers that doesn't truly exist. Today, I want to talk a bit more about this hyper-individualistic, fear of being perceived, egocentric phenomenon, and how we got here, how to break free from it, and how realizing that you don't matter is one of the quickest ways to living a happy, fulfilling life. Now, the first thing I want to talk about is nuance. When I say you don't matter, I'm obviously not meaning that in a black and white, degrading, you're nothing way, but just to point out how much our technology and societal norms have raised us to have such an unrealistic, hyper-aware perception that if not noticed, can end up causing unnecessary suffering. Of course, everyone matters, but the circumstances we find ourselves in today tend to encourage us to overestimate our importance or visibility. The spotlight effect is a psychological phenomenon that describes people's tendency to overestimate how much others are paying attention to them. Such as when someone feels all their colleagues are being nicer than usual due to a new hairdo, or when someone feels that everyone on the street is judging them for a pimple on their face. The spotlight effect is something that we all naturally feel from time to time, but it becomes a problem when it goes into overdrive and begins distorting one's sense of reality. Now, the spotlight effect is thought to happen for a combination of reasons. From the evolutionary perspective, it has to do with our social nature, tribal past, and how we may overanalyze our behaviors as a way to gain acceptance and avoid negativity or rejection. It can also be brought on by psychological disorders, such as a negative self-perception due to anxiety or depression, and these mindsets can cause one to be stuck in their head and unable to be grounded in reality. On the other end of the spectrum, it can also be from narcissism, and the belief that you are more important than those around you, causing you to feel as though you're always in a spotlight. Now, I know some people might find it weird that I'm conflating overestimating one's importance with a fear of being seen, because we tend to think that people who do are confident, while those who suffer with overthinking or social anxiety are the opposite. But I actually think it can go both ways. Yes, the prideful can overestimate their importance, but when you also feel like everyone is focusing on you with their judgment, you are thinking in a similar, distorted way. These mindsets have different causes, but still stem from the same self-centered distortion of perception. Most of us, especially if we're young, will eventually feel some form of social anxiety, but if you were able to get into the heads of the strangers you think are always judging you, you would probably learn that they were too focused on their own infinitely complex life to even notice your existence. Or if they did, maybe they're anxiously wondering if you are also judging them. When I say you don't matter, this is what I mean. Life is hard and we're all going through it, and most of the time, people are too caught up in their own complexities to take the time to focus on you. But more on this later. Now, a lot of times, having an elevated awareness of oneself and overthinking how others perceive you is just a result of an uncontrollable disorder. But I also think it's important to recognize the other cultural and technological factors as well. We live in a society that encourages pride, confidence, and individualism. And thanks to the rise of influencer culture and the smartphone, we are unknowingly being made to normalize narcissistic-like behavior and are putting so much importance on our individuality that it is magnifying how we respond to both success and suffering. Hyper-individualism tends to make us feel alone in our suffering and to think that we are unique in our victimhood. While on the flip side, when we end up experiencing success, we are more inclined to believe that these newfound benefits separate us from others and that we are now somehow special. Many of the problems we see here in the West, and specifically in America, a loss of community, normalization of narcissism, and an explosion of mental health problems, are not something that was inevitable, but the result of very specific policy and cultural changes. For example, looking back before the election of Ronald Reagan in 1981, America was dominated by something called the liberal consensus.
He pledged an end to breadlines and a new deal for the American people.
The liberal consensus, which lasted from the 1930s New Deal to the 70s and 80s, was a general agreement between both parties on the role that government should play in society. These roles included being active in the market to regulate and manage the economy, enforce and sustain welfare programs, and better support and expand civil rights. It was basically the opposite of hyper-individualistic neoliberalism and believed more in helping thy neighbor and that the government should attempt to step in and protect people from falling through the cracks and give them a fair shot at life. The liberal consensus was a response to the disastrous effects of the Great Depression and the massive economic inequality that led up to it. It encouraged a different approach to how we perceive our society. It was more collectivist and community-based compared to today. Now, Western societies have always been somewhat individualistic since the Enlightenment, but relative to now, before neoliberalism, community was far more important. This all changed with the disruption that the Vietnam War, civil rights movements, and economic decline of the 70s brought. Obviously, I'm grossly summarizing here, but these factors contributed to a rise in conservatism and eventually the election of Ronald Reagan.
I consider the trust that you have placed in me sacred, and I give you my sacred oath that I will do my utmost to justify your faith.
Reagan represented this paradigm-shifting rejection of the liberal consensus in favor of neoliberalism and small government. Neoliberalism believed in free markets, limited government regulation, slashing taxes on the rich and raising them on the middle class, abandoning social security nets, and ushered in this new social philosophy of hyper-individualism. Now, to understand why hyper-individualism is bad, we first need some nuance. Individualism in general is not inherently wrong. I think there are very real benefits to appreciating one's individuality, but I also think, like all things, too much of anything is bad. On one end of the spectrum, being too collectivist dilutes the very real importance of the individual and may lead people to feel like they don't matter or that they don't have any real potential in society, while on the other end, hyper-individualism makes people feel that society and those around them don't matter, and that their own well-being should be the main priority at the expense of everyone or everything else. Hyper-individualism, in the context of neoliberalism, is basically the belief that everyone is completely responsible for their own life and circumstances. It doesn't matter if you were born into generations of poverty or that the schools you attended are underfunded. Just pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Never mind that you don't even have boots.
Of the world's 85 richest people is equal to the 3.5 billion poorest people.
It's fantastic. And this is a great thing because it inspires everybody, gets the motivation to look up to the 1% and say, I want to become one of those people. I'm going to fight hard to get up to the top. This is fantastic news, and of course I applaud it. What can be wrong with this?
Really?
Yes, really.
So somebody living on
I celebrate capitalism.
$1 a day in Africa is getting up in the morning and saying, I'm going to be Bill Gates.
That's the motivation everybody needs.
Only thing between me and
I'm
that
not
guy
against
is
charity.
motivation. I just need to pull up my socks. I don't have socks.
Look.
And if you still aren't able to make it, it's not because you were dealt an unfair, disadvantaged hand, but because you just didn't work hard enough. Hyper-individualism rejects community and places the individual at the center of life, society, and meaning. Problems within society are no longer the result of nuanced issues that require us to come together and help each other out, but are the result instead of the individual's own bad decisions, and therefore are a deserved punishment.
In Chicago, they found a woman who holds the record. She used 80 names, 30 addresses, 15 telephone numbers, to collect food stamps, Social Security, veterans benefits for 4 non-existent deceased veterans' husbands, as well as welfare.
Due to globalization and the rise of consumerism, people also began viewing themselves through a more quantifiable capitalistic lens. We go from people who find value in our relationships with others to almost commodifying ourselves and attaching all value and meaning to our individualism, almost as if we were products to be sold. It's an us versus them, me, how can I benefit my own situation regardless of others mindset. Materialism and individualism replace identity and community. But while hyper-individualism represented this radical shift to and normalization of self-centeredness, the smartphone and social media took this concept to a whole other exponential level.
What now, my I'm so cute.
The idea that Paris Hilton represented in the early 2000s, that is being famous for being famous, or that individualism could reach such a level where simply existing was reason enough for praise and fame, was a revolutionary one.
You're disgusting. What a loser. Shut the f up.
But it was quickly surpassed by the smartphone, social media, and the influencer culture they helped give rise to. While the internet has given us incredible abilities like endless information, ways to connect and communicate, and the ability to become more aware of issues, it also took that Paris Hilton, Kim Kardashian influencer mindset and delivered it to us all en masse. Now we can all record our life and post it for everyone to see, or at least post what we want them to see. And this gives us the ability to all become the stars of our own show and to possibly garner actual followers, like the celebrities we ourselves also follow. But this further normalized a hyper-individualistic mindset. And this new dynamic where we're constantly seeing ourselves and ruminating on how the world perceives us through our carefully curated feeds has created a generation built off of mass, self-centered, internet-induced psychosis. I'm sorry, but it is not normal to check your story every 5 minutes and rewatch it as if you were every new viewer, or constantly examine your feed and selfies or themes and always think about how your followers are perceiving you. Some do it more than others, but let's be real here, we all do it to some extent. I quit social media and told myself that I would only post on Instagram because I only kept Instagram whenever I accomplish something or just do something worth sharing. And I must say, as someone who recently started posting again, the contrasting mindset that being off social media versus posting again creates is disorienting. I think I only noticed these things because I was off it for so long, but it is so insanely off-putting and even depressing how much I noticed myself suddenly checking likes and ruminating on how my followers were perceiving me. And mind you, I am not naturally this type of person. Anyone who knows me personally knows I do not give a what people think about me. If I did, I wouldn't have tattooed my own face. But it's almost like social media was designed by psychologists and hardwires us to be so self-aware and obsessed. But because I had gotten so used to not using it, being back on it had me overwhelmed with information and suddenly thinking about how I was being perceived. I know this all probably seems kind of off topic, but you just get a certain clarity after quitting and you realize how superficial and manufactured it all is. When I wasn't using it, I found myself like floating on a sea of contentment. Like, I'm naturally an ambitious person. I always have been, always will be. But focusing on myself and friends and cutting out social media truly made me present and look at not just social media, but our entire generation in such a different, unnerving way. Maybe this is just a getting older thing, but as someone who doesn't care what others think, the fact that being back on social media gave me this hyper-aware, compare and contrast, rat race worldview in less than a week is insane. But this point brings me back to the damaging effects of hyper-individualism and how it can facilitate feelings of inadequacy and force an adherence to unrealistic expectations. On social media, everyone is their own main character and is constantly attempting to build up their personality brand and gain some form of social currency. Better access to cameras and editing apps also means everyone is meticulously curating their image, and our perception of others is largely manufactured and false. But because of hyper-individualism, the first thought we naturally have when viewing these people we envy isn't one based off logic or reality, but is centered around wondering why we aren't also able to reach their level. We blame ourselves for not living up to a manufactured, impossible standard, instead of understanding nuance and realizing that shallow likes and attention are not what brings fulfillment, but strong social bonds and community do. Finding community and creating a small group of genuine relationships is a lot easier to do than gaining millions of shallow followers and likes. Now, I know many of you are probably thinking, okay, but aren't you doing exactly what you argue against by having a YouTube channel? And to that, I would say, no. I think the motivation behind what you do makes a world of difference. Do I want recognition for my thoughts and talents? Of course I do. Do I want fame and likes and followers? Not really, no. I obviously appreciate it, but I'm not sitting here gaining self-worth over how others perceive me. Like many of us though, I used to view fame and followers as desirable, but now I view it as something that I not only don't deserve, but even if I did, as something that's scary and daunting. I don't do what I do on this channel for social currency or clout. Yes, you need views for monetization and supporting yourself, but I have such strong boundaries with my channel, and I am not obsessing over how others perceive me or conflating my value with analytics. I have always said, other people's opinions of me are not my business. But I do think authenticity is so rare today, and social media really incentivizes commodifying yourself at the expense of your genuine truth. But what I will say on this point is before I got to where I am now, and back then when I was stuck in that rat race, I was chronically online and my priorities were much different. Life was centered around getting as many followers as possible and curating that feed to look impressive, and I was so in my head about how I was perceived that I wasn't really able to be genuine or see the answers to my happiness right in front of me. Yes, a fulfilling career is a part of it, but understanding that clinging to how I'm perceived or feeling like I need to live up to such unrealistic standards is hurting me did wonders for my mental health. Realizing that the reason I'm so hypercritical of myself is that I'm overestimating my influence and assuming the spotlight is always on me felt like the biggest weight lifted off my shoulders. What an incredible thing to realize I don't matter. There is nothing wrong with being like everyone else, and I don't need to chain myself to crazy expectations because who and what I am is and has always been enough. To be fair though, a lot of this just has to do with the fact that I was younger, because it is natural for younger people, especially children and teens, to view the world in a more self-centered way due to a lack of experience. But again, it doesn't help that the world we live in also encourages it and disregards community. I also honestly feel for those who maybe didn't grow up with a loving family or never got to experience what community feels like, because I think this is also something maybe you have to know personally to really understand its value. Growing up, I had a massive village-like family, but in my teens, I moved around a lot, and my sense of community was always getting shattered. I didn't realize it then, but I was subconsciously attempting to find that lost community in social media or the idealistic visions of my successful future. My goals weren't grounded in fulfillment or genuine passion, but were an attempt to find acceptance and validation. And now that I have done so much therapeutic work and have such strong support, I don't have that desire anymore. Honestly, ultimate success to me now is being that dad with a big house, big family, always hosting family events, and maybe helping make the world a better place through my expression. Again, maybe I'm just growing up, but I think a good portion of this is also psychologically deconstructing a hyper-individualistic mindset and understanding what I should really prioritize if the goal is to be happy and fulfilled. I think when a lot of us think about hyper-individualism, the first thing we see is how it benefits ourselves at the expense of everyone else. But that's not even true. It hurts everyone. When you place yourself in this position of such importance and put such crazy expectations on yourself, devoid of any support or community, you will never be happy and will be consistently in your head, scrolling endlessly, yearning to be like the ones you follow, and obsessing over how the ones who follow you perceive the artificial online image you've created.
Who the fuck's gonna pay me to be on OnlyFans?
A lot of people. Do you watch?